Chapter 20. Both halves of her split soul rested peacefully throughout the evening. For the first time since leaving the Eldarani seat of power, her two halves felt unified within her. Shinji had told her that when he was last tested, he'd been rated as having a greater psionic knack. Either Callie was far stronger than she thought, or he barely qualified for that rating. She'd saved his current personality, memory, and skills to the implanted chips in his head and felt responsible for him now. The training of PRI agents involved loading the knowledge of skills and abilities onto the chips in the wetware rig in their skull. That alone could explain the discrepancy between his rating and capability. It's possible that he could be formidable with proper training. More importantly, teaching him could be a good way for Callie to learn to better restrain the force of her own raw mental power. Shinji had been programmed by PRI to be a reflection of an idealized view of her brother, Vance. He'd gone through psionic reconditioning dozens of times since his capture at the tender age of 8. Kayla had been sent to a similar facility at the age of 14. If it weren't for the second consciousness within her, she would have ended off no better than Shinji had. Varshana and her team had freed her from the facility after waiting for the untimely deaths of all of its occupants. There had been over 15,000 patients there at the time, and Kayla had been responsible for all of their deaths. While sounding like an impressive feat, it had been the result of ignorance and incompetence. Fully accessing the Queen's mark within her skull was extremely dangerous. She could use it to create a hive mind, and has on 2 separate occasions. The first time she killed everyone within her collective by attempting to deactivate the ability. The second time a rival Cletharian queen attempted to seize control of her and her hive. If it weren't for the autonomous nature of her tales, that would have been the end of her, and could have made the false queen the greatest threat to sapient life in all of Corrales. Having this sort of capability within her, without the knowledge and ability to properly harness it, was a truly terrifying prospect. From an objective vantage point, if she were being honest with herself, killing Callie might have been the optimal choice for cyanide for the sake of Corrales, not merely for a single faction. Callie was beginning to understand some of Labartha's machinations, although the reasoning behind her initial creation continued to baffle her. The woman Cyan reported to, Aisha, was unknown to her. Callie hoped to meet her one day and get a better feel for who her Tejmare was reporting back to. Corrales was an awfully large stage with far too many players, where the playwrights all struggled to maintain narrative supremacy. She knew full well that one day she would fall, and it was unlikely it would be peaceably in her bed at the conclusion of a long peaceful life. The most she felt she had the right to hope for was to surround herself with enough people that were both trustworthy and capable enough to ensure the destruction of the alien gland within her head when that time inevitably comes. Callie rolled over and smiled to herself as she inhaled deeply. Cyan's scent was all around her. She didn't remember being woken up to sign that contract, but found it hard to believe her partner would have left without her signature. Then again, she was leaving out of obligation, not her own desire. Callie felt confident cyanide would have come with her if she'd been permitted leave to do so. She felt as if her Tejmare were still close at hand. The dim light flooding into the bedroom was being filtered through the leaves of large trees at the peak of the mountainous ridge behind the house. It still must be quite early. Maybe she hadn't left yet. Callie knew better than to get her hopes up, but her heart rate increased just the same. If she was wrong, she was running the risk of looking foolish, but if she'd learned anything from her time with cyanide, it was that the more you focus on others, the more you deny yourself. She bolted through the door, sped down the hallway, paused at the landing to wave to Prask, before rushing down the stairs. He had no active defenses, as if he were inviting her to see his thoughts. Tyrell and Cyan were in the garden, sitting at the gazebo quarreling over the wording of the contract. "If you do me the honor," the Edbar said as he laid a glass and pitcher of juice on the bar. Callie grabbed them both before passed. She opened the back door with her telekinetic ability before passing outside. She had no idea what their conflict had been, but was grateful the cyberpath had delayed Cyan's departure, regardless of how frustrated the woman had become. "Don't kill him," Callie teased as she approached the table. "I don't have time to find a new cyberpath." "Retired cyberpath," Tyrell corrected as he pushed a tablet across the table to Cyanide. "What this time?" Cyan grumbled as she looked back and forth between the screens of her own tablet and the one Tyrell had passed to her. "Here, here, and here," Tyrell said as 3 words were highlighting each screen. Cyan growled under her breath. "There's no difference. It's just word choice." Tyrell grinned. "Don't underestimate the power of words. I'm getting tired of explaining this. How about you just give up, let me fix all this loose language, accept all the changes at once, and save us both the time." "I like leaving room for interpretation," Cyan insisted angrily. "This is a really weird duel," Callie teased as she sat on the third bench so she wouldn't be seen as favoring either side. "I didn't expect you to still be here," Callie said to Cyan, then glanced briefly at Tyrell before continuing, "but I'm grateful you are." Cyan sighed with frustration. "Try to keep this one around. He's a real pain in the ass, but he seems to have your back." Callie smiled. "So, he meets with your approval?" "I didn't say that," Cyan snickered, "but he's already drawn Aisha's ire, and I respect that." Cyan's tablet beeped. "Is that second one my electronic pad from the ship?" Callie asked. Tyrell nodded. "Aisha accepted the last set of changes," Cyan grumbled. "What's next?" "I'm still working on the contract amendment you asked me to add," Tyrell said with a crooked grin. Cyanide turned to face Callie. "I asked him to add one simple clause and here we are, 2 hours later, and he's made dozens of changes and still hasn't added what I wanted." "There's no standard language," Tyrell explained to Callie. "So, I'm having to research it. And tap a few old contacts. I'm limited to what I can get for free. What we need is a paid intergalactic law consultant. There are no precedents or filings to model it after unless I model it after legislation that's intended for dealing with clone storage." Cyan smirked, rolled her eyes, and said, "If we do that, it may not be enforceable." "Listen, Pinky," Tyrell mocked. "You're asking me to add a clause that could potentially force the Lamentic Empire to go to war to enforce your ability to get fucked on the regular. If I screw this up, it could be disastrous." Callie blinked in disbelief. "Stop calling me that," Cyan sneered, "and stop blowing this out of proportion. I just want to make sure they give me some time off every few months to spend some time with my Tejmare." Callie blushed and reached out to hold Cyan's hand. "Maintenance clause," Tyrell snickered. "If I don't get the language right, you could end up with an entire Lamentic fleet showing up at some backwater planet because Lady Darkseid picked a bad time for a little shore leave." "Stop saying they wouldn't do that. I've done work for Lamentics before. Your nation is so insanely focused on not showing weakness and keeping up appearances, it'd be a miracle if they only sent one fleet." "Tyrell, just put the clause in there for now. We can just adjust it later," Callie said nervously. "Cyan, so you don't get in trouble, tell Aisha I refuse to sign unless there was a stipulation to ensure you had more time to instruct me in your ways." Tyrell shrugged. "Give me a few minutes to get the language and a couple thousand credits for consulting costs." Cyan grinned mischievously. "Will do. Just tell them to bill me directly," Callie said to Tyrell. "Are we expecting company?" Cyan asked. "No," Callie reached out with her mind and withdrew almost immediately. "It's Gowroon. Tell Prask to open the door for him." "Lady Darkseid," Gowroon said in a tone full of menace as he stalked into the garden. "You now speak to the first branch of the Great Oak. I have news for you, child. Varshana has denied your request for a meeting. Korbajani was just dispatched for Tazalum, and the test results from the analysis on that head have been completed. He crept over to the table, glancing at each of the people seated there. Good, Callie smiled, so, you have your proof. It would appear we were both in error, Gowroon snarled. However, I do not feel it is wise to divulge more at this time. Callie locked eyes with the druid and cautiously pulled the information she needed from his mind. Are you sure? Callie whispered. Gowroon nodded slowly without breaking eye contact. How? It would appear we were both wrong about General Vaughn. Gowroon grinned toothily, bobbed his head twice and turned to leave. There was something primal and aggressive in his movements, and a disquieting rage in his eyes. Wait here, Callie said quietly. Call Praskow back, and don't interfere. Cyan and Tyrell watched in confusion as Callie chased Gowroon into the house. Callie slammed the front door behind herself and stormed outside in pursuit of Gowroon. Gowroon sped around to face her, standing just in front of the fountain. Explain this to me, she said, realizing she was walking on the balls of her feet. I take it the child has lost control, Gowroon growled menacingly. I'd prefer not to fight you, Kivaza snarled as she slowly approached him, but I will if you refuse to explain this to us. The clone I killed was the same one that attacked my ship and killed Thalu. It was the same clone that killed Kayla while she was in that borrowed body, and you're telling me Raven 11 was Marno and not an actual Ravenhawk clone? Marno washed out of Acorn training, they were Bookworm's ETA courier, and they're the one that was where you had Kayla sent to get to Midguard. I don't care if the orders came from the old man, you're going to tell me what's going on here, or I'm going to shred your mind, break your body, and feed your soul to my lamentic friend. I do need you as an ally, and I will need your support in the future. Do you want me to earn your trust? I took down Korbajani to restore you to your rightful role, so why don't you explain to me why I shouldn't cut out all 3 roots, and burn down that tree both literally and metaphorically? I'm perfectly capable of fighting without the use of my knacks, and if I have to face off against Shavar, I will. Do we have an understanding, Druj? Kivaz and Gowroon stood just 2 feet apart, their eyes locked and blinking. His bloodlust was so intense, she could almost smell it in the air around them. His mind was locked down like an ancient vault through the force of his will alone. The 2-inch claws at the end of his fingers twitched involuntarily, and Kivaz's tails and muscles remained relaxed, waiting to act at the slightest provocation, whether it be to move with or counter a blow. Physically, he was stronger and more agile than her, but he had no knacks. His claws were the only weapons he needed, and she was unarmed. Don't risk it, Kayla urged from within the depths of her mind. When Project Acorn took over Hyrule, Gowroon had been sniping targets. He was undoubtedly formidable with those claws, but using them would make him no better than the beast he'd once been. He'd spent a lifetime seeking to dispel this perception. If he struck first, he would lose that battle regardless of the outcome. Using the rifle, taking precise shots, was not the action of a mere beast. Gowroon whispered almost inaudibly. Marno is Gyron, not Demo-Gyron. They have advised the general since the day she was first appointed. The being you killed was indeed Marno, yet they still live. I cannot resolve this paradox for you. Then I'll find it myself, Kivaza hissed as they slowly backed away from one another. Nadrok, it's not an end, but it may be a start, Gowroon snarled quietly as he stepped into a shadow and vanished. I want Grax on our crew, Kayla urged. It's too late. He's already gone, Kivaza thought internally. That was a big risk, Kayla thought as her consciousness returned from the depths. If we let him maintain the upper hand, he will never respect us, Kivaza thought in response. He doesn't understand loyalty, only capitulation. If you're asked to earn the trust of someone who only knows subjugation, you have failed before you begin. We have to choose between trying to teach them a new way or working with what he knows. Kayla's consciousness merged back into the hole as she re-entered the house. Callie wondered what patches of Shadow rune had stepped through to get to the house as well as to leave. Facing an opponent, in actual combat, who could move from shadow to shadow without traversing the space between was ill-advised. "Sorry about that," Callie said with a disingenuous smile as she walked back into the garden. "I couldn't risk any distractions during our little standoff." Cyan was sitting at the table looking back and forth between the electronic pad and tablet. Prask was standing roughly 2 feet behind her and slightly to her left, with his arms crossed behind his back. Tyrell turned to look toward Callie as she spoke, but his eyes looked hollow. Being a cyberpath, there was no safe way to look inside his head, but she suspected his focus was almost entirely on the nearby devices. While there are some uniformities in the functionality of all NACs, cyberpathy was an outlier. It was the one NAC unavailable even to Lamentix. Callie really didn't know much about it in practice, only in general principle. She'd only ever worked with one cyberpath before, but if Jax were to take an interest in educating Kayla, it wouldn't have been in the ways of cyberpathy. "How did that signal trace go?" Callie asked. "Did you locate Shinji's handler?" "I traced it as far as the Hickory link," Tyrell said without any change in his expression. "I'm going to need better gear to get further than that." Whoever set up their Lightwave relay network knew what they were doing. Direct access to the ship systems should help. "So, we still need a destination," Callie grumbled. "Cyan's being called away, Shinji's going to be stuck at the hospital for a while, my new armor won't be ready for a while. So, I can sit around avoiding Gaorun, bar hopping with Kiryu, or being fawned over by that nurse. I'm going to have to introduce you to the ship. And I'm not going to sit around here doing nothing." "Sorry, can't bring you with me," Cyan said apologetically. Callie caught herself before anyone could see her pouting. "Does Nadrock mean anything to any of you?" They went silent, Prask said softly. Cyan took a deep breath. "That's the 5th planet of the Nairobi system. There's a refugee colony there. They've been routing people there through Hyrule for about a year. How long have they been dark?" "I found out about it after I returned from the assignment at the hospital," Prask answered. Callie smiled and traced the feathers on her earring. "When you showed me how to use these?" Prask and Cyan both nodded. "That should do it," Tyrell said as both of the devices in front of Cyan beeped. There was a slight, nearly inaudible difference in the timing. "Let me just forward this," Cyan said with an exasperated sigh. "I think Aisha is getting." Cyan's tablet beep. "That was quick," Cyan chuckled. "I don't think she even had time to read changes. Princess, get your tails over and sign this with me before she changes her mind." The contract was signed and filed quickly. They all headed to the starport together and started on their respective journeys. Cyanide and Prask on their 7-day journey to Ekravolk, and Tyrell and Lady Darkseid on a 3-day jump to investigate the refugee colony in the Nairobi system. Messages can't be sent or received while in jump space, so transmissions are normally compressed into data packets, which are set for transmission once the ship returns to normal space. At which point normal communications are possible as long as the ship has a functional Lightwave emitter and is within range of a relay junction, gate or Starlink. The long quiet journey wasn't a complete waste of time. Tyrell updated and optimized the shipboard system's software, and did his best to teach Callie how to drive the shuttle and Mauler without depending on automated systems.